to another episode of Dojo Live. And today we're going to be speaking with Subha Shetty. She is the Vice President of Loyalty Projects at Synchrony. Subha, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Carlos. Very nice to be here too.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure. I look forward to this conversation, Subha. So, right now, Tulio, if you're watching, you, my friend, have a great celebration. You deserve it. And okay, so Subha, we're going to get it started. We're still waiting for Kim here to join us, but let's get started while she gets us and joins us here in the show. So, Subha, first of all, let the audience know who you are. Can you just introduce yourself and uh, tell us a little bit about yourself, please? We're going to start with that. How's that?
Sure. No, I'd love to. And again, thank you so much. And to Kim for this opportunity to come and talk to all of you today. I'm Subha. I am a digital product management and customer experience executive based in Silicon Valley with about 20 years of technology experience, out of which about 15-ish have been in product management and mostly e-commerce. I'm kind of living the American dream every day because I came from India about a decade and a half ago as an engineer, came here to do my MBA, and then found a really great opportunity at first Pepsi and then eBay, which kind of started my career in Silicon Valley. I've been very fortunate to create impact at both big and smaller companies, like launching various bidding formats at eBay. At Walmart.com, I launched their first grocery application, which, by the way, during the pandemic, grocery delivery is kind of a very ubiquitous solution out there, but
Yeah,
not
of course.
10 years ago. And after a couple of startups, I'm back at a bigger company now. I lead loyalty solutions and projects for Synchrony. You may have heard of Synchrony. Synchrony is the world's largest private label credit card, and basically just credit offerings for retailers and non-retailers. And by leading loyalty projects, I'd like to believe simplistically that me and my team have a small but meaningful role to play in how you and I and a billion of other Synchrony customers use their credit cards to purchase goods and services in any channel. And our job is to be able to continuously encourage you and I to be able to do that. I'm passionate about e-commerce, product management, and I work with many startup founders in the Valley and also internationally, advising them on product strategy. And I'm really glad to be here to speak about this topic that is very close to my heart. So thank you again for inviting me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you here again, Subha. Thank you for sharing a little bit about you and your background. And now let's talk about a little bit about, before we get into today's topic, let's talk a little bit about Synchrony. What is Synchrony and what's your value proposition? Can you elaborate on a little bit on that for our audience, please?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, Synchrony is the world's largest retail private label credit card for retailers. So simplistically, this means if you go to Amazon.com and you are in your cart, you will see a notification that says, get an Amazon credit card and you will probably get a discount off your cart. The credit offering is actually done by Synchrony, and not just for Amazon, but thousands and thousands of retailers. We also offer credit financing for healthcare providers, everything from mom and pop shops to large-scale healthcare agencies, and work with many different types of retailers in a multi-channel setting, whether it is commerce, digitally or in stores, so really a multi-channel kind of an effort. So what that really means is actually during the pandemic, Synchrony has had a very important role to play in enabling access for goods and services to people who may not be able to actually afford it. It also, and my team is kind of primarily responsible for that in terms of enabling these loyalty solutions that encourage folks like you and me to come back and keep shopping and keep utilizing these digital goods and services. So at a high level, this is what Synchrony is. And I can tell you that, having worked with some of the leadership team here, that it's a very mission and a vision, mission-driven company from the standpoint of not only enabling access from a credit standpoint, but also the way they take care of their employees, the way teams are structured and organized, and the values in the daily working atmosphere at Synchrony is something that I have been, a recipient of and really encouraged by the fact that, bigger companies can also have mission, and that reflects in their daily values and working philosophy. So I think that's been a really amazing experience to actually see and experience.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Subha, for telling a little bit more about Synchrony. Okay, now let's get into the juicy stuff of today's conversation, which is the topic, right? So look forward to this conversation because, as you mentioned earlier, due to COVID especially, there's a lot of effervescence, a lot of growth, a lot of new aspects in our everyday life that actually rely totally on e-commerce, right? From food delivery to buying goods and such. So we're going to be discussing innovation in e-commerce in a COVID-19 world. That's actually the name of today's conversation: innovation in e-commerce in a COVID-19 world. So let's start with that. Subha, why did you think it was, although it might be self-explanatory, right? But I'd like to ask you, why did you choose this particular topic, innovation in e-commerce in a COVID-19 world?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, I chose this specifically for two reasons. I mean, obviously, it's very close to my heart and my experience and background that I can hopefully speak about and educate listeners on. But mostly it came down to two different reasons. The first one is, like many industries that have gone through incredible change during the pandemic, e-commerce has not only registered unprecedented growth. I mean, you're talking 40% of growth, and at an industry that operates in the trillions, that kind of growth is kind of unheard of, but it has been registered, unfortunately, though, due to the pandemic. But not only is there growth, but also the industry is truly at the forefront of innovation, especially with respect to the way technology is used. So it is this interesting and unique combination of growth, hyper growth, and hyper innovation that really interests me. The second is, personally, I'm just very thankful for the e-commerce industry for saving my household during the pandemic. I mean,
I hear you.
Right? I mean, whether it was ordering daily groceries or celebrating a milestone or getting a birthday present, I think without the products and tools to shop online, mostly on my phone, I'm just not sure how I would have gotten through this pandemic, which again, largely remains unresolved. So e-commerce as an industry, is at this really interesting shift of, transitioning from an exclusive industry, meaning it, was accessible only by people with high technology infrastructure, more educated per se, etc. But now it's transitioning surely to a more mission critical and more ubiquitous business and industry. And I think this transition and shift in e-commerce is something that I'm also really interested in and kind of interested to speak about. Does that make sense?
Oh, it certainly does. Yeah, and especially when you mentioned the aspect of innovation in e-commerce, let me tell you what my perception is when I hear the word innovation. It conjures a whole bunch of images. And by the way, for the record, I'm not an engineer, so I don't have an engineering background. So my take on innovation comes from the layman, from the user standpoint. Okay, so I just want to clarify that. So when I hear the word innovation, it's what I imagine is I'm going to go online, for example, and then I'm going to find an incredible solution to my problem or to my personal needs that did not exist before. Okay, so the way I imagine innovation to be is I imagine a bunch of people, brainstorming and try to kind of analyzing what's going on out there so they can solve them in a creative way. They can innovate. So I see this. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I see it is this is happening to companies that have already either existing in the past, that have had to innovate due to situations like COVID, for example. Okay, especially in the tech world. Now, do you think that innovation would apply also to other more traditional brick and mortar type of companies that can benefit from this innovation mindset in order to, we're talking about e-commerce, but I'm guessing if other companies that are commercial in nature, commerce companies that have had to move into e-commerce because they were forced by COVID-19, for example. How would you say that they should envision innovation as a way to continue in business and grow?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and it's also a very broad question that you ask. So let me try and kind of answer this part by part. The first is that I think, to your point of is innovation the exclusive? Is innovation exclusive to a certain set of businesses? And the answer is an unequivocal no. Innovation is ubiquitous. I think the pandemic especially has forced anybody and everybody, whether you have a business or not, to innovate at any scale.
Right.
Whether it is a housewife innovating on her daily chores to an e-commerce business like Amazon innovating the logistics and supply chain of achieving holiday delivery. Innovation is everywhere. And so I think that aspect of innovation is very interesting to me, which is the more organic aspect of innovation, because I think innovation is sometimes confused with big, broad change that requires a big project and a lot of resources and a lot of constraints and dependencies. But actually, what is really interesting about innovation is that in our true agile framework, which was a technology framework that we all operate in right now, it's all about breaking things down and how do you achieve small, meaningful change over small periods of time, and really testing and analyzing that. So I think, so to answer your question, innovation is definitely not an exclusive commodity. Innovation is ubiquitous, something that everybody can do at any different level. And I think what is really interesting is that, when you talk about innovation from an e-commerce standpoint, there are some obvious innovation, aspects, but there are some non-obvious innovation aspects. And I think that's what is really interesting for me. So some of the obvious innovation aspects are how e-commerce companies use technology, how they're able to innovate on what's called the last mile, and I'll speak a little bit more about that. And then the whole explosion of multi-channel, especially during the pandemic. So if you would I'd like to talk a little bit about each one of these, because the more obvious innovation that is happening in e-commerce right now, which not only the bigger players, but anybody can take advantage of, is the explosion and innovation in various types of technology, whether it is using AR, VR, voice-powered search to be able to power a more intelligent search and browse, or it is using the latest ML and AI technologies to be able to build personalized experiences for you and for me, or it is the explosion in terms of in what's happening in payments, whether it is the explosion of payment wallets, digital wallets, or the more ubiquitous use of cryptocurrency. I mean, I was really surprised that I actually went to overstock.com to browse some furniture, and I actually saw that they accepted Bitcoin as a form of payment method. So it is becoming much more ubiquitous in these bigger sites. So you see, technology is really everywhere, and it's really powering holistic customer experiences with the use of that. I mean, even if you talk about customer support, your first line of customer support is usually a chatbot, but chatbots are getting much more sophisticated in terms of answering a lot more questions than just capturing your details. So that technology aspect of innovation is front and center. It is something that people talk about a lot is written about. With a simple Google search, you can actually find out so many things that are happening and will happen in 2021 as proposed trends for e-commerce. There's also a lot of innovation happening in the last mile, as I mentioned, and this is specifically, if you talk about just Amazon, for instance, it's that aspect of taking the product or the good that you've purchased from a transportation hub to your point of delivery, which could be your house or anybody else's house. So that last mile in terms of delivery is has just exploded and become so much more complex given the pandemic, given the increased number of orders. We've seen shipping companies actually increase their rates by 20%. And there's a lot of innovation from a logistics standpoint that is actually happening in that space too. And you'll find a lot more written about that. And the third is the multi-channel enablement. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I have bought online and picked up curbside. You hear this acronym called BOPS, BOPS, Buy Online, Pick Up in Store, which is a very common acronym right now.
Mm-hmm.
Although with the pandemic, you're not going inside the store to pick it up. So it's like a curbside pickup. So it probably needs another acronym. But there's a local Bed Bath & Beyond in my neighborhood. And I cannot tell you how many times I've bought cleaning supplies where I've bought it online, and within 2 hours, it's ready to be picked up in my local store, and all curbside and no contact. So there is a lot of innovation actually happening in these three areas, which are said, written about, and really great. And I think these are all innovations that anybody and everybody can actually leverage, not just the bigger companies, if you may. But what is really interesting is also some of the unsaid innovation. Not much is being talked about, in these couple of areas. Which is, the first is international, and the second is what I call social impact innovation. And at just a high level, when you look at international in terms of e-commerce, the global e-commerce market in 2020 was 4.2 trillion. So it exceeded 4 trillion for the first time. And the US e-commerce market was about 800-ish billion, which, by the way, is a 40% increase than before, but is 20% of the overall e-commerce market, international market. China has 2.2 trillion of e-commerce transactions in 2020. So really, a lot of the innovation is actually happening internationally. A lot of the growth and innovation is happening internationally. And I think that's something for us to look at, learn from, and really leverage in terms of how some really exciting things from a technology, hyper-local logistics, et cetera, are actually working internationally. And the second is social impact innovation. It's companies that are truly building products and solutions to improve their customers' daily lives. It's not just about putting another product out there to sell, but truly taking the mindset of, how can I improve somebody's life by crafting a solution or a customer experience that will improve their lives, save them time, make them more money in less amount of time, and whatever the variables are. I think that's something that is also really interesting that some companies are doing, but is not being talked about as much. So what I'm really interested is some of the unsaid, innovation in e-commerce during COVID-19 in terms of international and just social impact.
Right. Subha, as I was listening to you, I couldn't help but remember something that at least I have personally experienced at some point, and I'm sure that a lot of people out there have too, which is, again, we're all going through a number of changes. We're all resorting to e-commerce to solve our needs, and fintech, for example, has also experienced tremendous growth, but at the same time has also experienced some certain, challenges. And for example, I've experienced myself the fact that when I go to maybe do something online that involves some kind of currency or cash or financial transaction, I have experienced glitches. Okay, that I don't know if it could be an access glitch, or it could be something that it kind of makes me feel restless, because and whenever we're talking about our hard-earned cash, we get a little touchy if we see something that shouldn't be there, right? So in that sense, and again from the perspective of a user, and this is because you are your role at the company at Synchrony is tied to loyalty. What would you say that in e-commerce and fintech, what would you say that the challenges that have popped up here and there should be overcome from the technical perspective? Or let me rephrase my wording. What would you say to people out there, like regular users, that are experiencing these types of glitches in terms of what is being done currently to make sure that the companies retain their customer base, their loyalty? How is this being tackled by fintech, by e-commerce companies?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and kind of at an intersection of where fintech and e-commerce is. There are innumerable challenges, especially the pandemic has posed, for payments infrastructure and fintech, specifically from an e-commerce standpoint. And I'm not surprised that, Carlos, you had glitches. So did I. But here's where I think some of the interesting, I think I wanted to highlight some of the interesting things that some of the companies are doing to be able to solve these glitches.
Exactly.
I think there are two models, right? I mean, there's one model of companies introducing more products and services. Hey, there's another digital wallet. There's another form of currency. There's another. And so there's always then the whole cycle of kind of adoption and awareness and, usage and loyalty and retention and engagement. But there's a whole other concept of going where the customer is and meeting what the customer is already using. And let me give you an example of that. So I come from India, and in India, one of the biggest e-commerce players is actually not Amazon, it's Flipkart. Flipkart is a locally grown business in India, and it was started by two, engineers from their garage, much like how Google was, and is a multi-billion-dollar e-commerce player right now. And what they did, interestingly, from a payment standpoint for e-commerce, is that they noticed two behaviors of Indian consumers. The first one is that Indian consumers use a lot of cash. Credit card and debit cards and any form of like online digital credit products are not very ubiquitous in India. The cash is still the most ubiquitous form of payment method. And the second is, I remember growing up in India and purchasing consumer electronics like a TV for the house or a refrigerator for the house. And we used to get it with this concept called EMI, called Equated Monthly Installments. Okay. It's basically a way that says, Indians are very conservative, fiscally, and like to actually spread out their purchase and their spend over a period of time so that they don't tax some of their, immediate weekly or daily or monthly needs. So this concept of EMI is something that I was really born and raised with, and is still prevalent in many sophisticated forms in India, actually. And so what Flipkart did was instead of introducing another credit card or another form of digital payment method, they introduced what is called COD, cash on delivery. We bring you the product and you pay cash. And they had the infrastructure to be able to have a delivery person actually accept cash, give change back. I mean, if you think about the logistics of this, it's a bit complicated, but they were able to achieve that. The second is for a certain amount of purchase, they actually achieved what's called an EMI online. So you can actually go buy that TV that you like, and you can still buy it in the equated monthly installments that you're used to. So you don't feel like you're taxed spending 10,000 rupees up front, but you could space it out with 1,000 rupees over a period of time. This is a very actually popular credit offering, which, by the way, Synchrony also offers and is very sophisticated and quite the leader at. But that's how the Indian consumer is. And what Flipkart did really, really well is, instead of using other more ubiquitous or Western payment methods, they went and understood more about the Indian market and the Indian consumer and used cash and EMI as the true driving forces of their e-commerce purchase. So consumers then also, their barrier to be able to purchase online reduced dramatically, because this is how organically somebody would buy a TV or a book or a pound of rice, for instance. So India, it's a kilo of rice, but so I think that kind of innovation that Flipkart did was truly exemplary. It really comes back to, I think, what Tatiana once in one of your conversations said. It's really about the customer centricity of this and the focusing on the customer, and really building products and solutions that truly cater to that customer and putting the customer front and center. So it's, sometimes innovation doesn't have to be a big bang theory. I mean, it could just be something very simple that caters to our customers that way, that could be successful. And Flipkart was definitely successful in what they did.
It's what's called customer obsession these days.
Yes, customer obsession.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So, Subha, we are approaching the final segment of today's conversation, and I just want to touch a little bit more on on Synchrony itself. What would you say and this is because a lot of our viewers might be, I don't know, engineers who can be watching it, and the people who might actually want to work for Synchrony at some point, for example, what would you say to make Synchrony a great company, culture-wise? Well, why would folks out there might want to reach out and say, hey, I want to work with that company? What would you say to them as a teammate?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think anybody and everybody, including myself, want to work for a mission-driven company.
Mission-driven, yeah.
For a mission-driven company, not just in the writing on the wall, but also in some form or fashion is actually reflected in their values on a daily basis. And so and a company that is also fast growing and innovating and focused on technology and also has a healthy business. It's very difficult to find a company that does all of this. You will probably find companies that do great business-wise, but are possibly empty on the values in the mission space. You may find companies that have very strong mission and values, but actually are not healthy businesses. It's very hard to find a mix of both, and I think Synchrony is both. Synchrony not only is the world's largest credit company in terms of providing credit for retailers, healthcare agencies. It also is a consumer bank, just like Bank of America and Bank of the West, for instance. You could go to Synchrony and open a checking or a savings account. But I think what is really great about Synchrony is that, one, as I mentioned, its role has really evolved during the pandemic, offering credit products and services to a broad selection of an audience during the pandemic has really been, about really opening up access. So not just to the privileged folks like possibly myself right now, but also some of the underprivileged in various parts of the world. So Synchrony operates in many different parts of the world. But also, I can tell you, having worked at Synchrony now for a couple of years, the values that it has in terms of placing emphasis on teams, on people, on culture, on wellness, on health is truly exemplary. So for instance, let me give you an example of that. We have no meeting Fridays, which means on Fridays, we are genuinely encouraged to not have any meetings. And, a few of us flout those rules. We, schedule meetings because, it's urgent. And this morning, I got a note from our head of business that said, really emphasized his focus and attention on our health, on our well-being, and really asking us to be able to take that Friday to be able to stay off meetings and get work done and get prepared for the next week. And I feel like he really lives that. So I think we have leaders that actually live their values. And this note this morning was actually truly the icing on the cake for me. So again, if you want to work for a company that has a healthy business, focus on technology, a lot of technology opportunity, and a company that's truly focused on people and culture, then Synchrony is definitely the place for you.
Perfect. Subha, we have a question from one of our guys here internally. And okay, the question is, what do you see happening to a lot of brick and mortar stores where behavior has changed with consumers going online? Do you think they will convert to warehouses for e-commerce, or what's in store for the stores?
It's a great question. I wish I had a crystal ball and I could look into it and say, this is exactly what will happen. But what is happening, which is really great, is that there is a ton of innovation happening in warehousing spaces, logistics, even focused on like kind of mom and pop shops and actually encouraging and empowering them. So on one end of the spectrum, you have like a Shopify, which if you are a mom and pop shop could really use that to enhance your digital presence and acquire newer customers and build a brand, possibly internationally, globally. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have companies like Shipit, for instance, that actually, really make seamless your logistics and supply chain, things that some mom and pop shops would not really consider or be really challenged to do. Mm-hmm. And you also have companies that are, and I forget the name of the company, but you also have companies that actually make it easier for you to be able to transition from just a store to a warehouse space if you wanted to. So I don't, again, have a crystal ball that actually says is this the right thing or not? But I can imagine that there is innovation happening across this entire customer experience and life cycle. And it's actually really great that mom and pop shops or brick and mortar stores can really step back and say, what do I want to be? Do I want to be an e-commerce store? Do I want to be a fulfillment center? Do I want to be just a physical store? It's really, it empowers these stores to be able to make those decisions themselves based on all of that information. I think that the criteria is, though, that I hope that the brick and mortar stores will have all of that information to be able to make their choices for themselves, which, I think 3-4 years ago, they did not have a choice. But I think now they have a choice to be able to, direct their strategy.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Subha. And before we go, I'd like to just simply ask you to leave our audience with some final words of wisdom from you. What would you say to our audience in terms of whatever is in store for e-commerce in general, for fintech, whatever it is that you want to leave our audience with before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I think I'd just like to wrap up by saying e-commerce is at a really interesting inflection point. And I hope that we will all consider e-commerce companies or products and services with brands that are not only answering the question of what is our revenue and what is our profits, but also from a social impact standpoint, how they're focused on improving the lives of their customers and truly organically living and breathing that. So for me, at least, I think that affinity for me from a brand standpoint is extremely important. And a recent survey revealed that it's important for all millennials to be able to associate with a brand. So I hope all of us will ask the question, whenever we purchase something online, what is this? Not only is this the product that I want and can I get it in time, but also what does the company stand for? What are its values? And try and go and look for that and form an association with that.
Perfect. Subha, it's been a great pleasure to have you here. Unfortunately, we need to bring this conversation to an end. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you to just stay with us as we wrap up. I just need to make a little quick announcement for next week. Okay. This is about next week's show. We're got a full week to next week too. So first of all, Tuesday we're going to be speaking with Patrick Burns, the co-founder of Commons.so, and the topic is going to be recreating the water cooler talk for the remote office. So that's one. Then on Wednesday we'll be speaking with Sam Brenner of Chief Operations Officer of Boxcast. The topic will be the heart of live streaming, making people part of the experience. So, the heart of live streaming, making people part of the experience. And finally, on Thursday, we're going to be speaking with, let's see who we have. We're going to be speaking with Adam Jackson at Brain Trust. I don't have the topic for that one yet, but it should be as interesting as all of our Dojo Live conversations. And then, of course, on Monday, we'll be doing the recap show in which we recap this week's shows in 10 minutes. That gets interesting. And if you're watching and would like to be a guest on the recap show, just shoot us an email or reach out to us on any of our social media channels. We'll be happy to have you here as co-host. With that being said, Subha, it's going to be a pleasure and an honor to have you here. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay safe, everyone. And Subha, stay with me for a little while when we go off the air.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.